Hey guys, how's it going? Pablo here from Meditation Amsterdam. And I'm sitting today in Nepal, and behind me is no less than the Annapurna mountain range. Um, I'm in a little retreat space up here in the hills of a town called Pokhara. Now, the mountain range is a little bit covered by clouds right now, but you can see the Annapurna back there. And I'll make sure to capture a few extra B shots for you guys once I'm done with the editing of this one. And I brought with me just a tiny little backpack as I got away for a couple of days here in Pokhara. And I brought one book, and that is The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, which has turned out to be an amazing book as he goes a lot into explaining the value of mythology. And he was not just, well, he was a scholar, but he was, he was a real jock in his youth. This guy, he was quite an athlete, and apart from the fact that he studied all these mythologies around the world, he became very knowledgeable and also started to live by the mythology or the philosophy of Buddhism and Taoism, which makes him very interesting. And I mean, this was a guy who kept incredible company. I mean, he was buddies with Alan Watts. He was buddies with, he hung out with Picasso. He was really switched on. And it's funny that I was reading about him here because I've been hanging out during this trip with people who are about to climb the Ama Dablam, which is something like the fourth most difficult peak in the world. And these are guys who are involved in the ocean cleanup project. They're doing documentaries on Netflix about global warming and the effect on economics. And now they're about to climb one of the highest peaks in the world here in the Himalayas. And I'm sitting with these guys, and I'm just thinking to myself, we're having these incredible conversations. They are super kind. They are open thinkers, and I just think to myself, man, if I was surrounded by people like this all the time, God knows where I end up in a year's time. And so it just comes to show the value of the people and the company you keep around you. But it was just inspiring to be around guys who think in terms of possibilities, and not barriers, right? And are going out there and making an amazing change in the world, but they are also accomplishing things for themselves, and they keep themselves challenged. So it's quite a nice fit to have that company or be surrounded by that kind of company, and who are close friends of mine, and to be reading this kind of book and see where Joseph Campbell also writes about these things. So I brought The Hero's Journey, and what I wanted to do is I didn't, contrary to my previous book review, I didn't prepare all these bookmarks. What I did is I'm going to go by my typical underlinings, which is what I typically do, and I'm going to read a few phrases to you and just share a little bit, see where this goes. I think that the scenery just demands that I share something, and I'm going to try to give that a go. So I prepared a few quotes, and I'm going to read them to you and just elaborate. The first one is so first, the hero's journey follows the hero archetype pattern, right? So if you read all these mythologies, including the life of Jesus, for example, but many others, the hero's journey is that of a person who is born a king, but then gets exiled and goes through this series of trials, in which he essentially realizes his or herself. In all mythology is typically a he, and then comes back and shares that with the world. And but there's a certain quest that this person has to go through, and that is mythology's way of telling us that's the journey of life. So mythology is never about the character itself. Neither is a religion, by the way. All right, so these are archetypes, and they are trying to exemplify or illustrate or give us metaphors on how to live. So there is a certain moment in which the hero engages in the quest, and so this is the third chapter. It's called the Vision Quest. And the quote from the chapter comes from a book from Joseph Campbell, who wrote a series of amazing books. And this one is from Pathways to Bliss, and it says, "What is it we are questing for? It is the fulfillment of that which is potential in each of us. Questing for it is not an ego trip. It is an adventure to bring into fulfillment your gift to the world, which is yourself." So, so this is when the hero engages into the into the quest, right? So he starts going out there, and begins to not follow things to feel bigger or greater, but to actually realize yourself, or his or herself. And this is something that Steve Jobs was banging on about. He was, I've just come to learn, Steve Jobs was quite a rebel in his youth, and he was finding ways to unlock his mind from the momentum of society and upbringing and things of this kind. So he was trying hallucinogens like LSD and things of this kind, and he managed to essentially unlock his mind. And so the stuff that he came up with was, you don't come up with things that are revolutionary by staying within the framework that society is providing to you. So you do that by unlocking yourself away from societal thinking and from upbringing, and by then looking beyond that. So so that's the first thing, is you don't do it as an ego trip. You do it so that you can become who you were meant to be. Another way to look at this is, they say that the first half of life, so up until your, say, 30s or something, is about accumulating things, right? So that you can become functional in the world. And the second half of your life, or the rest of your life, you spend trying to shed those things that you accumulated, which are patterns that got you there but prevent you from going forward. So you can see life as a series of you acquiring knowledge, or acquiring these masks, or this scaffolding that builds you up and takes you to a certain level, and then being able to shed that scaffolding and shed those masks, or understand that they are just personas that you're acquiring to get you there, but they're not you. So you have to let go of them. You gotta do without them so that you can get to the next level, all right? And then you acquire the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and you keep shedding them all. Now he talks about this idea of people who, during his lectures, were able to understand this principle, and for who a certain bulb went on in their head. And he talks about how, so Joseph Campbell, he lectured for something like 38 years in this women's institute, and he said that he could tell when somebody suddenly got the point. It suddenly clicked, and he would see them 10, 20 years later, and he would compare them to people for whom the bulb didn't go off. And he said that they looked younger, more fulfilled, happier, and they were switched on. They were tapping into what their life was about. And so he mentioned something really interesting. He says, "Following your bliss just seems to me to be the clue to believing what might be called the mythologically inspired life." Now, I've been getting a taste for that during this trip. This trip was not supposed to happen to begin with. This buddy of mine who's climbing the Ama Dablam said, "Would you like to meet me in Kathmandu for a few days?" And I spontaneously said yes, and I just flew in with no plan whatsoever. And just a series of amazing things have been happening ever since I got here, and I've experienced this place in a quite an amazing way. And so just rolling with it, right? And we were having all these incredible conversations, and just there were I've had a few days where just one incredible thing after the next just happened, and they were not some of them were particularly amazing, such as seeing the Himalayan mountain range. I think I'll just have to make a separate video just about that. But just these small magical things happening, and when you put them in that mythologically inspired context, life starts to feel very special. And it's all about, it's almost like the software has changed, right? And it starts to feel really good. But imagine if you could live that mythologically inspired life even in daily work, for example, or just as you are home with your spouse or with friends or whoever. He says something else that's very interesting and says social pressure is the enemy. How in heaven's name are you going to find your own track if you're always doing what society tells you to do? And again, society is a scaffolding. It is meant to provide the most the biggest amount of safety and the biggest amount of well-being for everyone across the board. It is not meant so that you can fulfill your mission in life. Okay, it is just meant to provide that stable base for you from which to launch. I also think that not everybody's supposed to launch, and we were talking about that with these friends of mine. And at some point, someone said, "Yeah, and I can't believe that people sometimes live this lives of what Pink Floyd calls quiet desperation." And I said to him, "Well, you have to imagine that for balance to be at play, for the yin and the yang to always be there, pushing at each other." You got to have the progressive types and you got to have the conservative types. The conservative types provide stability, and they provide a kind of structure without which, it'd be anarchy, right? It'd be all over the place. And then the progressive types, they provide the engine to go further. They are the ones who are willing to take a little bit more risk, and they are willing to play sometimes even with their lives. I mean, you have stories about how medicine became what it is today, and before clinical trials were around, you had a lot of doctors just essentially, taking their own, being their own guinea pigs and taking their own medicines, and we owe our lives to them, and to the fact that they were willing to do that, and many of them died because of this, or they damaged their body irreparably, just so that things could keep moving forward. And they couldn't live without knowing. They couldn't live without trying to find out what was the elixir that would, cure pain in the case of anesthesia, or save us from I don't know, plagues and things of that kind. So. Well, plagues sounds rather dramatic. Disease, right? So, just even the flu vaccine came from people who were looking at stuff and observing that people who have had mild cases of cow flu didn't become sick with the plague, right? So you need both. So this is by no means an invitation to be the revolutionary. Find out who you are and what fits for you. But if you are the type who's the stable type, then be a magnificent stable type, right? Be that rock that people require you to be, and that you are, and that you feel fulfilled by becoming. Develop that, nourish it, nourish other people who come to you for solidity and for advice and for stability, if nothing else. I'm not that. I've never been that. The more I read and the more I cultivate myself, I do find myself having very interesting conversations and giving advice that people seem to consider very valuable, because it comes from a wider paradigm, right? I don't comment on the small individual problems. Of course, you have to humor that a bit, but I try to make that. I try to pull people out of the small little rut in which they've stuck themselves, and to provide a wider the wider scheme of things, and then people are like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. But I'm by no means the patriarch type that sits at the head of the table or anything of that kind. It's just not in my nature to be so. I'm more explorative, and I am a little bit more adventurous, right? Hello. And but it works anyway. So if you're the stable type, then develop that. If you are the more adventurous type, then you have to start developing that side, and find out what it means. Hello, sir. Yes, you can leave it there. No problem. Thank you. And so this was a big rant about how social pressure is the enemy and how you can't develop yourself if society tells you what to do. Okay. And so it also says those who did what dad said they should do because it's safe found out it's not safe. It's a disaster. And so why is it a disaster? Because, well, first of all, there is no such thing as safe. But secondly, how can you develop yourself and become excellent at what you do if you're following somebody else's path, or just doing what you were told to do? It just makes absolute no sense. It's going to be a very flimsy and very unsafe life. Excuse me. And I've been in situations myself where I was not doing what I was supposed to do, yet surrounded by people who were, and they will do loops around you, because these are guys who will, they're not working, they're playing, and they do it in the weekends, they do it all the time. They're researching, they are in groups that are all about this kind of stuff, and in the meantime you're just kind of trying to churn through. Forget it, it's not even worth trying. You're not going to get anywhere. You might be okay at it, right? But it's just not going to be a big fulfilling type of thing. Now here's something else. There's something rather, what can I say, exhilarating about putting yourself on the side of life instead of on the side of protective ideas. And this speaks again to this whole notion of the ego, right? So this idea that you were given a bunch of programming when you were younger, and you spend the rest of your life trying to protect all these ideas, as opposed to just going out there and rolling with things. And if nothing else, I was describing why this trip felt special. Why did it feel mythologically flowy, if you will, or whatever? And it's the fact that I felt safe, and I felt like I could go with the flow without needing to control things. And if you go to Kathmandu, I promise you, you can't control anything there, okay? It'll kill you. And maybe I'll share a funny anecdote. My neighbor was here 20 years ago or so, and he had a little book about Kathmandu, fairly recent book. So he gave it to me, and I was reading that book. It's a little Dutch book, and it said something like, between 24 and 48 hours, somewhere there, you'll realize that you can't be uptight in Kathmandu, and you'll just let go at some point. And so I was surrounded by this mess of a city, and I thought to myself, there's no way in hell I can let go. I need to just like hang on tight, because this is insane. And I remember the specific moment at which I let go, which was I was riding a taxi back from a temple called the Bodhanath, which is one of the Buddhist temples, one of the most beautiful ones in Kathmandu. And my taxi driver, so it's peak hour. We're surrounded by dust and smog and traffic. And my taxi driver is this young guy who has, I think, has Tourette's or is on drugs. So he's kind of talking and laughing, and he's going, like that, right? And I'm like, what the hell is this? And then while all that is happening, I look to my right, and there's a couple of dudes in some construction site, and they're carrying this big cart full of cement, and then the whole thing starts to wobble, and it suddenly topples over, and it spills all the cement irreparably in the wrong in the wrong spot. It's like, it was supposed to go here, and it spilled over there, and they're like, blah, 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 blah. And that was the point at which I let go. I thought, okay, people spilling cement over there, crazy traffic, taxi driver with Tourette's, that's it. I let go. You got me. I'm no longer, Pablo gives up on control here. I'm just gonna roll with it. And since that moment, Kathmandu was a funny experience. But ever since I landed, I was not. I didn't have a plan, and I was at some point thinking, I don't know what I'm doing here. What the hell am I doing here? I just flew in with no plan, no idea what the hell, and my buddy was 48 hours away from flying in. And normally, when we experience uncertainty of that kind of, like, who am I? What am I doing here? And what the hell? Your first instinct is to try and come up with a plan, with some kind of strict plan that you're gonna get a grip on things. And this time I thought, you know what? I have no clue what I'm doing here, or what the hell, and I'm just gonna roll with that. And that turned out to be the big difference. So when Joseph Campbell talks about something rather exhilarating about putting yourself on the side of life. That's a very Taoist statement. It's not by coincidence he's saying that. Later in the book, he goes very deeply into Taoism and how the Tao is all about being with the Tao is the way the Tao is life flowing. This unending stream of change just going, and you either presenting resistance to it or just doing what in Tai Chi is known as sung, which is relaxing and releasing and just allowing things to flow. And when you are in that mode, really interesting stuff starts to happen. To begin with, you're no longer adrenalized or stressed. You can carry yourself with a different vibe, and then the city or your environment begins to respond to you, and you have this reverberance or this harmony. And that's very cool. It's very, very cool indeed. And I can say that I've experienced that very, very strongly this time. He also says catharsis is a ritual term, and it is elimination of the ego perspective. So the ego is the clinging and the resistance and the holding, right? And then the Tao and the Sung is the release of that. So wiping out ego system, wiping out rational structuring, yeah, smashing it, and letting life, boom, come through. How cool is that? And so now you're letting life flow, and you're letting it come through, and that's the smashing of the ego and the rational mind. That's not to say that you have to become irrational. It's not that. It's almost like think of it this way. So the rational mind is the one that is dissecting things and analyzing them and solving problems, and it has great value. It's brought us really far, but that's not where you're gonna get your fulfillment from. Yeah. So you're not gonna wake up one day and go, man, I feel really in the flow of things because I'm super analytical and I've solved all these, my balance sheet is in order right now and therefore I'm fulfilled. It just doesn't work that way. The way it works is you become more embodied, you become more in touch with what your entire system is feeling, you become more in harmony and in touch with your environment, and you let life come as it is, and you accept it exactly as it is, even if it's tough and upsetting and rough. But you accept the roughness, and you even accept what it does to you. So if you become super upset, you become totally accepting of that as well. And so you're not resisting anything anymore. And when you do that, you find that things come and go in these waves, and then you are like a surfer that is going with the flow of life. So how about that? So that's wiping out the ego, right? It's you're no longer analyzing and controlling. You are releasing and allowing, and you are let's say feeling. Right, so this is not about touchy-feely, but it's more about you're in touch with the bodily sensations, and that's what brings you out of that analytical lock, if you will, and that's when you begin to be in the flow of the Tao. So he says we are all in our consciousness one, and we are one with the totality and potentially omniscient, but the brain brings us to focus here, so that we can live in this particular time and space. The brain is a constrictor. It contracts our knowledge. We know all these facts to help us here. In other words, the job of the brain is to keep you alive and to solve problems. But look at what we mentioned about the analytical mind dissecting things. So you keep slashing things into smaller bits, and that prevents you from flowing with the whole. And it's natural, right? It's like you can take a beautiful butterfly and then smash it up in little pieces and sort of see what each of them is doing. But then don't complain if the thing doesn't fly anymore, because you've chopped it up, right? So it's the same with everything else. It's the same in your relationships with people or with yourself. Is if you start analyzing and chopping things up, it's almost like you can chop them into infinite pieces, and it's an endless rabbit hole of analysis. Whereas if you step back and you start feeling things and you start allowing them to be what they are and simply perceiving them, then you know the butterfly in that metaphor can fly, and it can be quite beautiful. And if we take butterflies as the same for a different context or a different example, think of it in the sense of the analytical mind is the one that sees a butterfly and wants to control it. So he goes out with those nets and is trying to catch it. And when you are with the Tao, so the feeling mind, the mind that keeps you in touch with your greater self and your environment, is the one that just allows you to sit, and then the butterfly will come and sit on your hand, right? So, and you'll allow it to be there, and you'll allow it to leave when it wants to. And I think that with that example, I would call this a video. It's been a fantastic trip. I really wanted to share that with you while I was here, while I'm still feeling in this amazing vibe. And you know, my fingers are crossed. And how I hope that this beauty that I'm experiencing here in Nepal, how I hope that it comes with me as I go back, and that I can keep sharing that with you guys. This book by Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, is a fantastic little book. I hope to do a few more episodes regarding the book, because I think it's worth doing. And that's it. I'm gonna try to give you a last view. I think that so one peak is still visible. I'll try to zoom that later on, and that is Pokhara behind me, and that's the valley. And hope you guys enjoy that. I'll be getting back to Amsterdam in a couple of days' time, and that'll be good night, goodbye Nepal. So see you next time.